Those questions, I'm not looking for an essay. I'm not looking for a long paragraph, but I'm looking for some description, some thoughtful words from you about these differences. And because it's electronically delivered, you are going to have the opportunity to answer them in a more fulsome way than if you were just handwriting them. People last year, I think they were shaking their hands. And I sympathize. So this time it'll be electronic, and I don't think there's any limit on how much you can type. But don't go overboard. But just about anything is better than reading handwriting. Okay, so that's the second type of question. So the first type is sort of analytic, solve this or characterize this, write out these equations, what have you. A second one is sort of these ones where I'm asking you to write some sentences. A third type is fill in the blank. So it'll say, the name of the network that exhibits power law scaling in terms of the number of connections per agent is, and you have a blank, and you have to fill it in. What's the answer to that?
Scale free.
Scale free. Scale free. Fine. It's a scale free network. So with a scale free network, if we plot out the number of the connections, how many people have a certain number of connections, so this is K, the number of connections that they have, and this is the probability of having that many connections. What we'll see is, if we draw this out crudely, we'll see it sort of dropping off quite steeply here. But it's actually proportional. The probability of having K connections is proportional to that. It's proportional. It's not an alpha. Proportional to K to the minus gamma. Okay, and what this means is, if I'm comparing the probability of having 2 connections compared to 4, it's the same ratio of probabilities as 200 compared to 400, or 2,000 compared to 4,000. It's that same ratio of probabilities. But a more useful way to look at it, besides this one, is if I look at the log of the number of connections versus the log of the probability, what will I see? Anyone? What will I see there?
Straight line.
Straight line. It's scale free. No matter whether we look at in the area of a smaller number of connections or a larger number of connections, it's the same behavior in terms of the log of the probability. Okay, and it means it has a long tail. Most people have few, but some people have a lot. So I might ask you, the name of the network that has this property is that, or I might ask you, blank, you have to fill it in, is a modeling method which emphasizes interaction between different actors and actors in the environment and the resulting emergent behavior that comes from that. What would that answer be? Agent-based model, yeah. So I'm asking you to fill things in there. And there's a fair number of those. The final type of question that I have on there is a true-false question. So I might ask, true-false is, all transitions within state charts are memoryless. Is that true or false? good call. So, good call. So yeah, it's what type of transition is memoryless in a state chart? Sorry? Yeah, well, first order delay, and the first order delays we talk about in system dynamics, when we have a, yes, it's notably memoryless. We have a transition with the probability alpha. This is a stock X, it is probability alpha. And what's the formula for this flow? It's for first order delay. What's the formula? Sorry, the formula for this guy is what? For this flow? How many people per unit time flow down here? If alpha is a chance per unit time of leaving the stock.
Alpha times X.
Sorry?
Alpha times X.
Yeah, alpha times X. Alternatively, how could we phrase it in terms of the mean time in the stock?
1 over alpha.
Yeah. So here we could have a tau, in which case this formula will be what?
X divided by tau.
X divided by tau. Good. These are two different faces of first order delay. And if I ask you, what's the relationship between tau and alpha, what would you tell me?
Tau is the reciprocal.
Yeah, tau is the reciprocal of alpha. So alpha is reciprocal of tau, or tau is the reciprocal of alpha. And what that's telling you is that if I have a chance per unit time of leaving the stock, my mean time in the stock is 1 over that. So I have a chance per unit time of, 0.2 per day, 20% per day chance of leaving the stock. My mean time in the stock is what? 5 days. 5 days, ladies and gentlemen. Chance per leaving is a probability per day, so it's dimension 1 over day. 1 over it is dimension 1 over 1 over day, which is dimension day. Right? Alternatively, if I told you, oh, this is a first order context, you spend an average of 5 years in this stock before going on, it would imply a hazard rate, a chance per unit time of 1 divided by 5 years. Either goes. So this is a memoryless process. Whoever said that is bang on, that's true. But I was actually asked you about state charts. But with state charts, it's a very similar thing. With state charts, with a certain type of transition. What is that transition? Give me 4 types of transitions associated with state charts.
Delay.
Okay, so we have 4 types. One is a delay transition. That's a fixed time. Is that memoryless? No. In fact, it's exactly memory full. Your chance of leaving is 0, except for at exactly the time it's a Dirac delta function. It's like you are going to leave. It's an impulse function. You are going to leave at the time specified. So it's not memoryless, it's memory full. It's about as full of memory as an elephant. Arguably more so. Okay, so that's one of the types of transition. Give me another one. A rate transition. Now a rate transition with a fixed rate, is that memoryless? Yes. 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 It is memoryless. In fact, it corresponds just about directly to a first order delay out of the stock in terms of the mathematics. With the stock, we think about, the number of people, say, in the stock is decreasing exponentially here. With a rate out of a state, we think of the probability of remaining in the state as decreasing exponentially. In each case, it's proportional to, does anyone remember the nice function associated with this? What describes this function? It's a nice function. It's a beautiful function. It's an eigenfunction of linear time invariant systems, although you folks maybe don't fully appreciate the gravity of that statement. What is it?
E to the x.
Yeah, e to the minus e to the minus alpha t. It's proportional to that. E to the minus alpha t. Now, I want you to be rock solid about some things. And we only have a day to make you rock solid about it. I feel that's right. Is your chance of leaving this stock here, or your chance of leaving the state with the rate transition, is that chance of leaving in the next day, is that dropping this e to the minus alpha t? No. My chance of leaving it, given that I'm still in it, my chance of leaving it is what? Over the next day. It's the same as it was for the first day. It's the same as it is for the second day. Each day I have the same kick of the can, the same chance of leaving in the next day, as long as I'm still in that stock. But does that mean that there are an equal number of people leaving the stock on the 10th day as the first day? No. No, it doesn't mean that at all. And you could say, well, they have a higher chance of leaving in the first day than they do in the 10th day. That's true if you phrase it in an unconditional way, but if they're still there on the 9th day, at the end of the 9th day, they have the same chance of leaving on the 10th day as they did on the first day. It's just there's few of them still around because most of them left earlier, right? So ladies and gentlemen, don't be fooled into thinking the chance per unit time of leaving, the chance of leaving the next day, it's another way to sort of say it, is dropping. No, it's the probability of still being in that stock, or the number of people that are still in that stock. The probability of a given person being in that state, in that stock, that's what's dropping as e to the minus alpha t. Okay, so a rate transition has the same basic mathematics associated with a fixed rate. It's the same basic mathematics as a stock. And is that memoryless? Yes, it doesn't matter how long you've been there, you have the same kick of the can of leaving the next day. I feel so torn about saying this, because I think okay, now they're really gonna get it, finally. Finally really gonna get it. And then I'm gonna have to stare at my department head and he says, you can't give all the hundreds. But then I feel like, yeah, okay. They all deserve it. I gotta fight tooth and claw for it. Make me proud. I'll go up against the department head any day if you all do 100. Okay. But somehow I secretly fear that won't be the case. Okay. Okay. What other type of transitions are there in any logic? Message transition. That really doesn't have a nice analog in system dynamics model. A message transition. That's asynchronous. It's triggered by occurrence of events somewhere else in the model. Can't be pre-scheduled statically. Like when you come into the SOC with a delay transition where it knows, it actually picks what's the delay going to be and schedules, you're going to leave at this time unless something else preempts it. Same thing with the rate transition. It actually draws from an exponential to figure out when you're going to leave and actually pre-schedules it. So unless you leave by some other, like a message or another transition, it knows when you're going to leave. With a message transition, that's something you can't anticipate when it will come in, and you'll leave via that. So that's good. Message transition. How do you get a message transition? How does that happen that you're triggered by a message transition? You get a what? A message. And that's sent to you or delivered to you. And I'm not going to go into the details of the difference, although it turns out there's a difference between those two. Send is asynchronous, deliver is synchronous. Deliver can get stuck in a nasty loop. If I deliver it to you and you deliver it to me, and then it's like a recursive function call where A calls B and B calls A, and bad things happen like Stack Overflow. And hopefully people won't cry. But send is asynchronous. Like I send the message and it comes back and it doesn't have to worry. But don't worry about sending. I try not to test all sorts of details in the internals, the detailed semantics of any logics mechanism. But you send or deliver a message. Okay, what's another type of transition? Conditional transition. There it's actually checking whether a certain condition is true and leaving if that condition is true. Now there's a thing called a guard which can be applied for any of these. And a guard basically confirms this thing has to be true to go on this transition. If it's not true, you're not qualified to leave via that transition. And that's an additional consideration, but we didn't really cover that, and I'm not going to go into it on the exam. What's another type of transition?
Agent arrival.
Agent arrival transition. That's exactly it. Agent arrival. What's that associated with?
Location.
Yeah, mobility specifically. So agents moving around frenetically, zipping around in one of two modes could be. By the way, when you read modes, yeah, you should think about states. A mode often, as Alex said, suggests states. So why? Because a mode is sort of a persistent regime of behavior. It's a persistent type of behavior. In order for it to persist, we have to remember that we're in that state, we're in that situation. And the way in which we do that most commonly in any logic is through a state and a state check. So if you saw that in the assignment, think state. Okay. So those are a bunch of types of transitions in any logic. The one that has the most direct mapping to system dynamics is the rate transition. So I might ask you a question, which transition type has the most direct correspondence to a flow within system dynamics? Now, let me ask this. In system dynamics, we have, well, okay. Let me make further comments about the exam. So I want to finish up sort of the high levels of the exam. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it would be very important that you pace yourselves. Okay? Try to do a scan through the various questions, hit the ones that are quick early, so you don't get bogged down halfway through and find yourself not being able to fill in a whole bunch of really quick ones at the end because you run out of time. It happens each year that some students run out of time. It also happens each year that some students leave well before the time limit. It also happens each year that some of the students that are in each category sadly make it very easy for me to mark because it's just page after page with red X's because it's blank. So don't be stuck in either extreme. Study well and make sure you're not caught flat-footed by the length. You will be asked, so this exam is a little bit unusual in the sense that you're able to type rather than entering things longhand. And you will be asked to type some special characters. So there'll be some things which mention, for example, delta or tau or alpha. And I'll show you tomorrow when orienting you to the exam how you can type those. Okay. So you can type them out in your answer. And it'll be easier than reading the handwriting attempts. You will be asked to do some work there. There are some times where within this class I went into extra levels of detail about certain things. And by and large, I would say, if anything characterizes the exam, it's not terribly demanding in any one area, but I do expect you to know your stuff. I do expect you to know your stuff. I do expect you to have a good, solid understanding of each type of thing that we covered, and that includes some of these basic mathematics. This thing is decreasing exponentially. It includes solving for equilibrium. It includes being able to characterize the mathematics associated with transitions like this, or with stocks and flows, in a clear mathematical way. I'm now going to ask you to prove stability of the system, but we talked about stability and its relationship to certain types of feedback. Which types of feedback are associated with stable behavior?
Negative.
Negative feedback. And unstable behavior? Positive feedback. Good. What sort of feedback is associated with oscillatory behavior?
Delayed.
Delayed. Good. Delayed of what type of feedback? Negative feedback. Think about a situation where, you're trying to pilot something, maybe it's a car or what have you, and you overshoot and you overcompensate and correct the other way, and it sort of alternates around. It oscillates. So typically that comes from, trying to bring it back to some goal, and you go up and you overshoot and you undershoot, and you may come back like that. This is a negative feedback. This is goal seeking, but it's goal seeking not in a way that neatly converges, but in a way that's oscillatory. So this is negative feedback with a delay. Okay. Why is it important? I mean, this whole thing about stability. I talk about stability of an equilibrium in a system. Why is that interesting? Why do we care about stability? A lot of it is because we care about robustness. We care about whether our systems are robust or fragile. And I'm looking for a way to demonstrate this neatly without being dangerous. But we're interested in, if we set up systems, are they resilient? Do they resist disturbance? Or do they fall apart easily? Do they fall apart upon disturbance? So in equilibria, everything is balanced. Everything is in balance. But the question is that a stable equilibrium? Or is it one that could be thrown off by a slight disturbance? Is this something which will resist buffeting in its area? Or is it something where, if it's disturbed in the least way, it'll fall over? We want to build systems often that are well balanced, that are there's no bottlenecks, that things are sort of well coordinated. But we don't want it to fall apart if there's an imbalance introduced. We'd like a situation where, Saskatoon is Ebola free. But not only that, we'd like it so if someone comes in with Ebola, it can be quickly dealt with. I have a close friend of mine who was unfortunate enough to catch on an overseas trip a case of typhoid. And typhoid is not a disease widely seen in Saskatoon. It's a tropical disease, and he caught it in the tropics. And he came over with a case of typhoid, and they had all the systems set up to sort of immediately get him on treatment and monitor him and make sure he was under control. And and meet with him on an every couple day basis, etc. He was someone who, the situation was in stasis before he arrived. If they didn't have that set up, he might have spread it to others locally, and it might have turned into 2, 4, 8 cases and caused a mini outbreak. So we want systems that are not merely in a desirable balance. We want them that are robust and resilient. That's something I'd like you to know about. Now, there's things I wish you knew about, but I can't really test it up. Like I wished you knew that in order to determine stability and equilibrium, we linearize the system around that equilibrium. We treat it as sort of, how does it behave right around that equilibrium in a linear way, representing the fact that right around a given point, a system that's nonlinear is pretty well approximated by a linear system, and then we figure out the eigenvalues of the system. When we look at the biggest eigenvalues, we see if any eigenvalue is greater than 0, and it's because all of the eigenvalues lead to these things called eigenmodes that are described exponentially. And if we have e to the, and I'll use a different thing here, e to the gamma beta. If gamma is negative, then we get convergent behavior. If gamma is positive, guess what sort of behavior we get? It shoots up. It shoots up exponentially. And that's instability. And each of the eigenmodes is associated with an eigenvalue here. And the eigenmode sort of is a characteristic type of behavior. And if even one of them is positive, it leads the system to get more and more, just get flung away from its current state, further, faster and faster, like an outward. Okay? That's what I'd love for you to know, but I'm not going to test you on that. But you'll make me very happy. I'll write that. Okay. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, those are some broad comments on the features of the exam. Are there any questions about the sort of character of the exam that I can answer right now? Questions people want to ask. Is there going to be something on X? Is there going, yes?
I have one question, like what's the percentage of the mathematics that needs to be done? Like as overall percentage of the whole exam?
Of the marks?
Yeah, I think so.
It's on the order of 10 to 15% of the heavy lifting mathematics. The reason I smile is because you may think that suggests it's easy. But in fact, the fact is that some people do, there's a group of people who do great on that. There's a group of people who do pretty well on it. They haven't gotten some of the details right, but I tend to mark generously if they basically know what they're doing. Please tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you're trying to accomplish. And then there's a set that exhibit thrash and flail behavior. And then there's a set for which is totally blank. And the thrash and flail, yeah, it's a sad thing to see. And I don't know what they're doing often, and it's not clear they know what they're doing. I don't know what they're trying to accomplish. So you'll do pretty well in that if you know what you're doing. Like if you know what you're trying to get out of the problem, where you're trying to get to, communicate that to me, and you'll get a lot of marks. You're going to have to do some algebra. People make mistakes in algebra. I get that. Look for ways to simplify your life when you do algebra. If you always see 2 terms together or 3 terms together, you could, that's the only place you see them is together. You can group them into 1 term. Yeah. So you see A plus B plus C always together, call them Z, and just, you know, keep on passing on Z. If they're always together, just call them Z, and at the end, where you see Z, substitute A, B, C, boom, done. If it's a pain to keep something as 1 over, if you have something 1 over A and it's really painful in your algebra, you're always dealing with this 1 over A, give a name to that. Call it, you know, call it theta and make it 1 over A. And then do the thing in terms of theta and substitute it in at the end. Try to look for ways to sort of save yourself work. But most important, communicate what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to get to. And if there's a point where you get to where you don't know how to take it forward for some reason, tell me why you don't know how to take it forward. What's blocking you? And that will, you know, help me recognize, okay, you've had the maturity to recognize something is wrong. That's a good thing. And you know, that can often elicit marks. So I spend quite a bit of time trying to figure out, okay, how many marks do I give this partial solution? But again, some people just nail it, and then some people it's blank. And it's the ones in between that are hard, but the ones that thrash and flail have the toughest time, and often I have no clue what they're doing. And they write down letters, I can't even tell. Sometimes I wonder if they're trying to make it so I can't tell what they're writing. You know, like, is that a D or a delta or, you know?
One of them will be right.
What's that?
One of them will be right.
That's right. Yes, I've been in that awkward situation before. Hopefully the digital form will make that more difficult. Okay, other questions about the exam, contents. Are certain things going to be on it? My stories won't be on it. Yeah.
Will it be more based on the second half of the lectures than the first, or in this breakdown?
Good question. I'd say pretty even. Pretty even. There's some lectures which are less heavily represented. I would say the lectures on particle filtering and the lectures on state space reconstruction are, I'm not testing any details, knowledge about that. Lectures on sort of principles for model scoping. There's some important things there. And I certainly want, as with those lectures I just mentioned, I want you to know something about it. But I'm not going into, you know, enormous detail about what I covered. In general, you know, for each lecture, I like to think there's a core set of, like, if you cornered me or put me in a cage, you know, for a given lecture and said, just tell me 5 things in this lecture you want me to know. I actually have a pretty good idea of what those 5 are for most lectures. And that's typically what's on the exam. It's those essential things. I try not to go into inessentials. I try not to go into the vagaries of the details. But there's some factoids, there's some perspectives, there's some elements of the mathematics, there's some techniques, there's some intuitions, there's some concepts which are important, and often in each lecture there's a small set. And that is what I'm trying to communicate to you tonight in these slides. Is sort of going through a bunch of lectures and characterizing that. Okay? Any other questions before I start that? Okay. Okay, so I have a bunch of slides on portions of the course. This is a broad characterization of topics which we have hit on that I consider important. Motivations for modeling, sort of the process and scope of modeling, the different processes involved in it, networks, the types of networks we use, feedbacks, types of feedbacks, this notion of metalinguistic abstraction, picking the language which we use to describe a problem. And we have this extraordinary ability as computer scientists to create new languages to describe systems. With abstraction, we build up hierarchies of functions or classes in software engineering. We have libraries that capture certain functionality or certain common things we need to do in a nice method or what have you, or a nice software pattern. Metalinguistic abstraction lets us do that with languages. We have a nice language to abstract just the features, the essential features of the situation, to capture the essential differences between contexts while abstracting away from the commonalities. Those three techniques, agent-based, discrete event, system dynamics, these are all aspects of metalinguistic. These are all different languages which can be deployed. Nonlinearity in infectious disease modeling. I used infectious disease to talk about contagion, to talk about these processes. Number one is an exemplar of nonlinearity. You can't get infected unless there are both susceptibles and infectives. If you consider how a system evolves, with a linear system, the evolution of a linear time-invariant system, you could imagine taking half the state, filling the rest with zeros, and simulating that. The other half of the state simulating that, sum the two together, and you get the simulation for the whole system in the original states. With nonlinear system, you can't do that. You can't say, we'll simulate it with the susceptibles first, and then we'll simulate it and no infectives, and we'll simulate it with infectives and no susceptibles, get the simulation results from each and add them together and expect to be simulated with both susceptibles. In fact, that's somehow similar to simulate with both. Forget about it. You need both in the same model with nonlinear models. Infectious disease models also have this contagion phenomena that involves interactions between individuals from the perspective of agent-based modeling, or mixing from the perspective of models associated with for aggregate models. It wasn't the only sort of, and that's associated with coupling within a system, coupling between susceptibles and infectives. But it's not the only sort of coupled systems we looked at. We looked at another pronounced nonlinear system that involved coupling, that involved this interactions between these different stocks in the model, or different components of the model. And actually, when I gave my lecture to you earlier this afternoon, I talked about a system like that at some length. It was a coupled system. What was that system? Predator and prey. Predator and prey. That's another coupled system. That's nonlinear. Nonlinear. You have x times y, for example. And nonlinear systems, ladies and gentlemen, are of great significance for several reasons we'll probably talk about. So that was a significant topic, and that involved notably some formal model analysis as well. X dot, Y dot, characterizing these systems, identifying the fixed points of those systems where the rate of change of all the states is 0. Solving for those fixed points, What are the values of the state variables, the stocks at those fixed points, in terms of the values of the parameters? These were all important. And so we kind of used that as a case study of how we can apply this formal model analysis. We also talked about calibration. Calibration being the process of taking a model and adjusting the parameters of that model to allow them, and the assumptions are associated with that model, to allow the model to best match empirical data from the world, to match most closely observations that we have in place from the world. And we did that and as a way of figuring out reasonable estimates for parts of the model, like parameter values that we otherwise don't know. So, it's no guarantee the resulting model is correct, the calibrated model that matches the observed data really well. But at least it has a certain phase plausibility. At least it's a reasonable hypothesis in many cases for what's going on in the world, and one that we can work to challenge in other ways, to test in other ways. So we want to calibrate less well-known things so that they at least allow this model to be consistent with the empirical evidence. And most importantly, and this is important, I'm not sure I gave it due justice. I remember mentioning it. But calibration is an opportunity to learn. Why do we learn in calibration? How can we learn in calibration? I'm trying to get a model to reproduce data from the world. How can we learn?
Which parameters are more important or which it's more sensitive to?
Good. We can learn what they're more sensitive to. What's another thing we can learn? So that's good.
What the accurate parameters might be.
Okay, yeah, so we might learn what plausible values of those parameters are. Or going back to Paul's point, we might learn actually that there are several values of parameters for which it matches up, and others for which there's one unique point, sort of very sensitive to that assumption in one case, but quite insensitive. It allows a wide variety of matches with this other parameter. So that's good. What else might we learn though? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we might learn that the model can't match the effectively the data. In your undergrad courses, did you ever talk about curve fitting with polynomials? Yeah? Okay. So you have this idea that if you have a bunch of points, you can fit a polynomial line to them, or you can fit a spline curve as closely as possible, or what have you. And it turns out that if you have enough terms in the polynomial, you can pretty much match any set of points. You can get it squiggly enough, it'll go very close. Models, these sort of dynamic models are generally not like that. Generally, dynamic models, their structure determines their behavior, ladies and gentlemen. And what this means is you can't get any old behavior out of these models. Often what you find in calibration is no matter how you adjust these parameters, you just cannot get it to match this observed data. And ladies and gentlemen, that is not a failure. That is a success of learning. Because the success of learning, wait a minute, I thought the model of the world captured in this model would account for this behavior, and it doesn't. I need to rethink either the accuracy of that data or the accuracy of the model as characterizing the world. I need to change my way of thinking about the world often to characterize that data. If that data is correct, I need to change my hypothesis for what's going on there in the world. And that's very powerful. So calibration is a chance to learn from the world where a model just doesn't add up. It's not consistent with the evidence we see from the world. Okay? Sensitivity analysis is another key process. And Paul has correctly highlighted that actually I didn't play it up in this class, but there's actually an interesting literature which I've contributed to about what are the interactions between sensitivity analysis on the one hand and calibration on the other. Some people do calibration first and sensitivity analysis next. Some people do sensitivity analysis first, and they calibrate the parameters that are most sensitive, and don't worry as much about those that are less sensitive. Now, what does sensitivity analysis involve? What does it involve?
Disabling some parts of the model and seeing how it behaves.
Sorry?
Disabling some parts of the model
Yeah,
and seeing how it behaves.
so that's the structural sensitivity analysis. We sort of might disable, so I like that, disable certain parts of the model and see how differently does it behave, how does it behave. What's another component of sensitivity analysis? Besides structural, we might vary what? Parameter values. So we vary the assumption about a parameter, and we'll see how much of model that changes model results. So maybe in a predator-prey model, I think yours would behavior looks something like this. It wasn't quite as sharp. This would be sort of like the predator's behavior. And you might adjust the assumed birth rate of predators or something per gopher eaten. And you might find, it goes, within a small variation of the parameter, it goes much higher. You say, wow, in terms of the number of predators, it's very sensitive to that parameter assumption. Just a difference of 1% can make a difference of 10 times in the size of the population at its maximum. That would be an example of sensitivity analysis. Now, turns out that sensitivity analysis in a nonlinear model it turns out it's a little bit more complex because the sensitivity of that model could be different in different basins of attraction or around different equilibria. What do I mean by that? I just made an utterance, and some of you will probably understand it, and some will not. What do I mean by that? I just talked about basins of attraction and nonlinearity. What am I talking about? To what am I alluding?
If the model has multiple equilibria, then some of them might be more stable than others.
Yeah, and often when we think about these equilibria most usefully, when we talk about basin of attraction, we're talking about a what? It begins with, there's two words. One begins with an S and one with an state space. It's a state space construct, okay? We're talking about a basin and state space. And in a nonlinear model, we might have two different basins, for example, where the system is in this range of behavior, there's an equilibrium here it tends to go to. And if it's in this other range, there's an equilibrium here that it tends to go to. And it tends to go to one equilibrium or the other. Now, this is true for many systems. One system would be a disease die-out versus disease staying endemic. Situation where gonorrhea is gone from Saskatoon versus where it's endemic. It stays in Saskatoon. Or measles stays, and you have these little outbreaks every few years with measles, as used to be routine, versus where it's basically disappeared. But this also occurs in other circumstances. I'm very sorry to say it, but for those who are planning to become software engineers, this is a fair characterization of my experience as a software engineer and as someone working in industry more broadly, where there are some project teams where you can imagine this axis might be sort of level of turnover, so they're lower turnover, and perhaps they are sort of lower defects, and you have people correspondingly incidentally having high morale and not needing much documentation because they can keep a lot in their head and share it within their team. And this is a situation where there's less disruption. It's pretty well controlled environment. You're able to deliver well. People feel good about it. And this is a situation perhaps where you have high turnover for the project. You're always fighting fires. there's lots of documentation needed because it's a revolving door with people leaving and people needing to be let go because the client has cut funding because the product quality is very poor, and you are thrashing as a organization, and often managers are making bad decisions based on symptoms rather than causes. They say, oh, we're having too many bugs, so we're going to penalize people that have bad code, and it leads to people to hide their code, their defects from them, or it hardly incentivizes testing, and you know, the manager is thwarted, or the manager says we're behind, and they yank the hours up, and people can't go home and take care of their families, and they can't take the vacation they've been hoping to, and they feel it's a horrible environment, and some of them quit, and then the project's further behind, and they have a hard time finding good people, and when they bring someone in, they take the time of the best staff away from the project, and the project stays further behind, and it's subject to Brooks Law, where you add people to a late project and it makes it later, and you're in a different basin for traction. You're in a fire, you're just in a constant firefighting mode, you're too busy bailing to plug the hole. Believe me, you think I may make this up? It's really true, and it's horrible that this could be the case. And a bad manager can take you from here to here. That's the scary thing. A good manager can take you from here to here. But this is the quality chasm. This is the difficult thing to get across. But you can do it, and unfortunately sometimes you can, you know, have a project which loses morale, and the best people leave, and it goes over here. I've seen that. Go to hell in a handbasket in a year, or something like that. So ladies and gentlemen, this notion of state space, different situations a project could be in, or different situations a society could be in with respect to an issue. It's a very real issue. And around each of these equilibria, there's very different behavior elicited. And a parameter that's very sensitive in this area can be very insensitive in this one. So sensitivity is often with respect to a certain region in state space in a nonlinear model. And it's in nonlinear models that you get these multiple basins occurring. You get very different behaviors in different cases. Because in a nonlinear model, mark my words, in a nonlinear model, the behavior of the system, the rates of change of variables, the chance of a given person's leaving the stock changes with model state, okay? So you got, depending where you are in this, the behavior can, in the state space plot, the behavior can change quite dramatically. And these are different basins of attraction. It draws you in. This is the vortex state of high firefighting, sort of low morale, low quality, high turnover. And this is the gel team, high morale, low turnover, high productivity, high resilience state. Okay, dynamic modeling methodologies. We went through each of these. Each of these has associated with it its own way of characterizing systems, its own areas of specialization, its own areas of its own formalisms for describing the system. System dynamics, amazing technique for describing the dynamics of continuous variables in feedback-rich systems in the context of, well, of accumulation processes and feedback. Why do I say continuous variables?
Because the stocks are continuous,
Yeah.
so you'll have fractions of.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll get a fraction of a person. They're continuous variables. They go up and down continuously. They're not categorical. It's not like the stock contains either unemployed or employed, or male and female or something like that. No, a stock has a real number associated with that varies. System dynamics is very commonly in the context we've been applying talking about applied at an aggregate level, but it can be used within an individual as well to characterize changes in viral load or changes in stress levels, changes in levels of the immune system response, etc. Agent-based models are used to characterize one or more populations of agents interacting with each other and with the environment, and to study the emergent behavior made possible by the interactions of those agents at a higher level. They're also very effective for looking at nested contexts where we have individual agents nested within families, within neighborhoods, within cities, within regions. And it turns out any logical has gorgeous hierarchical models. So you have an agent, you have people within a neighborhood, you have a neighborhood within a city, and it's all nested nicely, just like it naturally mirrors the nesting in the world in terms of how these things are inside each other. Very nice. Discrete event simulation. I noted that that this is a slightly of a misnomer, because it turns out agent-based modeling frequently makes use of discrete event handling. But discrete event simulation is a term used for characterizing systems that are operated in defined workflows with an interest in throughput and latency of the system. How many people per day can be treated, for example, how long it takes someone to be treated end to end. We're interested in the impact of resource availability on those quantities through the system, or resource placement. And we're dealing with defined workflows and flows of these entities, they're traditionally called, through this workflow. Hybrid modeling. I didn't actually have a separate hybrid modeling lecture, but we built several hybrid models this term. What was one hybrid model we built? Anyone remember?
Agent and SCM.
Yeah. So agents and system dynamics modeling we had together. So we had dynamics associated with stocks and flows, and we had agents in there as well. What was another type of hybrid model? Agent-based and discrete event. Remember, people got sick and they went to a clinic and entered the clinic. That was another type. We didn't look at, but we could have, situations where agents have within them stocks and flows. This is another mode. There's another mode, which is really nifty, where you have the broader population characterized as system dynamics at an aggregate level, and when people flow out of a certain stock, they get budded into agents. They get turned into agents. And they then live as agents. And sometimes they can turn back into stocks and flows. They enter the stream and they sort of go into the stocks and flows, okay? So ladies and gentlemen, hybrid models are very powerful. The fact that we can build them is really useful, because it means that as we learn about our model, we learn which areas require more detailed description. We could use, for example, an agent-based model for that area, or a discrete event model when we're interested in resources. Or we might just say, okay, we don't need that level of detail, we'll approximate it with an aggregate model. So we start to ask instead what area of our model needs certain languages, not which one should we commit to for the entire project. Incremental modeling, ladies and gentlemen. Incremental modeling is one of the most important things I want to convey to you. The importance of building a model iteratively in a step-by-step basis. Okay? I spoke about that earlier this afternoon. I'm not going to dwell on it here. But it's one of the most important principles. Why do we do incremental modeling? Give me 4 reasons why I might do incremental modeling.
Makes the stakeholders happy.
It doesn't make the stakeholders happy. They see progress with it. Good. Excellent. What's another reason?
You know you understand it at each step.
Exactly.
And you can observe what changed since your last one. So you can understand specifically what behavior changed when you added this feature in. And you understand where this dynamics came from, which is often really important once you get to a full model where all these things are happening. What's another reason?
You You can test things out and see what works.
Yeah, you can test, exactly. You can try different strategies and possibly back up, so that's good. You don't just throw it all into the kitchen sink and run it all together after a year. Say, wow, you know, now what? Instead, you can try things out. So I love that. That's actually great. What's another thing with testing? When the software engineering part of me, when I hear test, my ears perk up.
Debugging?
Yeah, you can debug it. I mean, you put something in, you run the model, and you observe something really funky going on. That might be an emergent behavior, or it might be a bug. And you got to investigate. And if it's a bug, why are you better off? If it's a bug and you find it, and you learn it's a bug, why are you better off? You realize it's a defect. Why are you better off now fixing it, tracking it down and fixing it if you've only done a little bit since the last time?
So you know what it is?
You know what? You've changed. It's only been a few things you changed. So you know where the defect must live. If it wasn't there in the last version, now it is. Only a few things have changed. So you can more quickly zero in on it. And it's easier to test, because all you have to do is put in a few more tests related to the things you put in, rather than testing every thing. Okay, give me another reason.
The requirements might change.
The requirement. Man, this is good. Man, this is good. The requirements might change. Stakeholder requirements change over time. Stakeholders don't fully realize often what they want until they see something about it. And then they realize, oh, that isn't quite what I was thinking, do this. They didn't quite envision it before. They didn't quite understand what to be getting. So requirements do change. Or maybe their needs have changed, in a genuine way. They realized, oh my gosh, we could get a really good paper out of it on this, or we could analyze this scenario. The board comes and asks them, can you investigate this? And they say, okay, we have this new priority from our health minister to look at this thing. Can you do it? And that happens quite a lot, actually, in my experience. But there's one more thing. One more thing. Remember, models are learning tools. Often it's not until we build the model and run it, we realize, oh, that's the way it fits together. Or that doesn't account for the behavior like I thought. Or, oh, that's really interesting. So we learn things by taking a step with our model about what's needed. We learn what the model is going to account for in its existing pieces and what it doesn't, and we reprioritize based on that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, that's some reasons for building a model incrementally. I say any logic mechanisms here. Oh yeah, I do expect you to know some trade-offs between these types of approaches. Okay. Give me three things that system dynamics doesn't represent when representing contagion that you can capture quite explicitly in agent-based modeling. And think about an aggregate system dynamics model characterizing the spread of infection versus an agent-based model.
Stochastics?
Good, stochastics, yeah. Traditional system dynamics is deterministic. Good.
Connections and distances between agents?
Yeah, connections and distances between agents. So networks, connectivity, location of agents. Those are typically abstracted away from in a system dynamics model. And in general, in system dynamics, there's assumed to be random mixing. Everyone in a stock is assumed to be kind of more or less interchangeable. And that can be challenged in an agent-based model. We can have, if this is a family and they have ongoing interactions together, and they're not just interacting randomly with other people in the population. Okay? Ladies and gentlemen, any logic mechanisms? I'm asking here about things like the types of transitions. I don't think I asked about hierarchical states because I don't think we really, shade charts, we didn't really capture those or address those. Talk about events potentially, talk about messages, etc. Formal model analysis. Formal model analysis, we talked about it just a few minutes ago. Solving for equilibria, etc. Okay, that says state-state reconstructions. That should be state-space reconstructions, ladies and gentlemen. Like we talked about today, this notion we can reconstruct the state-space using a time series. Implementing interventions in a model, too. We ask what-if questions often by changing parameters. Systems effect. There's this notion that with nonlinear systems, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. They can lead to emergent behavior that can't be reduced to any one piece of a model or to the average of the pieces that are there. Models are often used to ask, does the evidence support my hypothesis? Where's the situation likely to go next? In other words, to project forward, to ask what's driving the behavior, etc. Or we want to intervene. We want to ask where to intervene in the system. What will be more effective? Which groups should we intervene on, or how? How soon will I see effects? The whole paradigm of this course is representing processes in the world. Patterns of causally interacting changes going on in the world. These are things that are often tightly related, causally tangled. And to understand the patterns we see from the world, we try to reason about the processes that give rise to them. And it's appropriate that computer science has the study of this. That we characterize the algorithms, we characterize processes in computer science. And there's natural processes out there that play out, and simulation modeling in many ways it consists of the art of characterizing those processes in a way that will be amenable to answering certain questions. So these models go by many different names. You'll find them called in some places computational models, causal models, mathematical models, mechanistic models, models of the physics of a system. But the fundamental thing they capture is simulating this phenomenon of simulating step by step the evolution of a system over time. Whether it's discrete event model or system dynamics modeling or agent-based modeling, we're simulating how the system behaves over time. Models are thinking tools. You'll sometimes hear people holding them up as somehow in opposition to or as a contrast to data. Models help us think more crisply about the system. They allow us to take, what if we thought the system worked in this way, would it be consistent with the data we have? Would it be consistent with our observations of the system? And they let us test that in a rigorous way. They let us test out sort of our thinking, not in our heads, not in a way that's trapped so no one else can see it, but in a clear light of day in a model that others can critique, can use themselves, and we can run it and see if it's consistent with our evidence. And we can use these to inform our choices and advance our understanding of the system. So this is really part of a process of observation, debugging our own thinking, and coevolution of sort of how we act in the world and what we collect. So we talked about the modeling process as consisting of a bunch of stages: problem conceptualization, qualitative problem mapping. What is problem mapping? What is included there? Yeah, okay, so we're visualizing the scope of the model, so that's good. But give me an example of a type of model mapping I actually asked you to undertake.
Causal loop.
Causal loop diagrams, type of model mapping. Okay. They sketch out in a qualitative or semi-qualitative fashion. It's got some polarities associated. We can identify feedbacks, negative and positive. And often those are quite sort of powerful in allowing us to focus in on certain areas of a system. model formulation, where we formulate equations, calibration, testing of a model, and use of the model. These are three really important things. Man, I haven't talked about this for a while. This is arguably one of the most important slides that for me to show right now, because it is something I haven't talked about in a while, and which I think is actually pretty foundational. Can anyone remember what's the distinction when we're thinking about the scope of a model between something that's endogenous and exogenous? What does it mean for something to be exogenous?
Exogenous is provided.
Yeah, exactly. So one way to specify this, endogenous things, so exogenous things, we tell to the model what to assume, we pre-specify it to the model. An endogenous thing, the model tells us. Why does it tell us this? Because it's generated by the model. By running the model, it outputs endogenous thing. It calculates it as part of the model. And ignored things are things we leave out, often consciously. What's an advantage of putting something into an endogenous side as compared to exogenous? Can anyone say why would I put it endogenous rather than exogenous? What would I gain by so doing?
You'd be able to see emergent behavior.
Yeah, you'd be able to see some interesting emergent behavior. So, for example, and be able to use that in our planning. An example of this would be in discrete event modeling. We may endogenize movement of agents, and in the time it requires them to go from A to B. Why is that significant? Why would we want to do that? So it's nifty, and our stakeholders can see the agents moving around. Why? And that can lead to some buy-in, but can help them to visualize the situation better, understand what we're trying to do. That's not to be dismissed. It's actually sometimes builds credibility a lot. But why else could that be helpful? Why not just program in how long it takes to get from A to B?
There might be different routes that can be taken, or if they go to different locations, it will take them longer.
Yeah. So maybe we want to be able to, in the model, simulate the effects of route closure, so they can't go this way, they have to go this other way. Or maybe we want to simulate something like congestion. So this route becomes slower because it's crowded. Ever go by the airplane hangar when it's really crowded outside? Outside of it, and you can barely get through, in which case your travel time becomes slower. You might like to be able to examine cases where, resources in this area exhausted, so you have to go to this other area instead. And so by calculating endogenously how long it takes you to get from A to B, you have much greater flexibility. What would be some advantages by having in the exogenous category?
It might speed up the model running.
Lower burden, computational burden. How about another thing?
Makes debugging simpler.
Yeah, makes debugging because there's fewer moving parts. Okay, good. Another thing?
You could supply a custom distribution based on empirical data.
Yeah, you could ground it very closely. Empirical data. You specify to the model, make this happen. You parameterize it in rather than trying to calibrate the model to that data, which is otherwise what you might do. Another reason is exogenous things are typically require less work to put in, and so you can build that part of the model quicker. And then if you have to build an endogenous. Okay, so ignored, we consciously leave things out. Ladies and gentlemen, models are like maps. And all maps are precisely useful because they leave out a tremendous amount of detail that's not really relevant to our needs. We use them for certain purposes, and the this shape, what's in the map and what's not. And it's the same way with models. It's more challenging with models to know what to put in, what to leave out. But the same principle applies. There's obviously a lot of things we just don't need. And then there's going to be some things in the gray zone where we're not sure. Often we start with them ignored. We start with a very simple model with minimal endogenous things, and we add things in bit by bit, learn from it, observe it, or quickly debug it, gain stakeholder confidence, make sure we're prioritizing according to the stakeholder, and build towards a situation which has additional endogenous components as needed to address the question. And often that means sometimes taking things out of this ignored common. Okay, I'm not going to go into, we really didn't talk much about pattern-oriented modeling, but often we're trying to get the model to match certain stylized facts, certain features of the world that it captures, whether quantitative or qualitative. Okay, we talked quite a bit about network types over a number of lectures. We talked about a number of network types. Characterize for me a feature of a Bernoulli network, also called a random network, also called Poisson random. Give me what's a feature of that?
Distance doesn't matter.
Sorry?
Distance doesn't matter.
No. There's no locality at all. Two people A and B are connected with probability P, regardless of who they with, who else they're connected with. Normally, if I know person B and you know person B, you and I are more likely to know each other. But here that's not the case. Characterize for me a ring lattice network. What's a ring lattice?
Will be connected to your neighbors?
So imagine everyone in the population is connected to a certain number of people, and they're in a linear order, sequential order, mod n. So there's a big ring, and they each person is connected with a certain number of neighbors, and that person is connected, with others, etc. And it all goes around in a big circle. It's about as local as you can get. In order for me to get from me to you, it has to go through each person along the way. Boom, 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 in a linear sort of order. Could go two ways to reach you. Infection spreads pretty slowly in these sort of networks. Why?
There's only a left and a right, there isn't an open and a
Yeah, exactly. There's only left and right. Good way to put it. And if either one of them is blocked, like by a recovered person or by enough recoveries, you can't get through it. And so it can easily be blocked. Distance-based is a little bit like this, except here there's north, south, east, west, but it's still very local, and you can get boxed in. It's like a prairie fire where, if it's been burnt all around it in a ring, if there's a firewall around it, a fire barrier that's already been burnt deliberately, it can't spread effectively beyond that, and it sort of peters out. By contrast, tell me about small world networks. So these are very local. Bernoulli, Poisson random, these ones are all the same. These are purely global connectivity. It doesn't care about locality at all. How about a small world network? What's that?
It's a combination of distance-based and
Yes.
random.
Yes, and Poisson random. That's right. So it's actually a combination of ring lattice but it's a very local on the one hand and very global on the other. Okay. So 90, 95, 97, what have you, percentage of the connections might be local, and then a small number are global. So, for you it may be that most of the people are, here in Saskatchewan, but a small number of people from outside Saskatchewan. And it turns out that this sort of network was defined by Duncan Watts and Steve Strogatz as a way of sort of characterizing social networks. And it characterizes this fact that most of our interactions are with a small number of people, but then there's some bridging people that can go long distances. And it turns out that makes all the difference in the world in terms of infection spread. Why?
Because you can jump across the ring.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just like a ring now. It's like a ring where there's at least a few connections, and these connections allow it to leap, allow the sparks to leap across suddenly. They can leap across here, and they provide something that's much closer to a random network, actually. It can spread. And I don't know if you've ever heard the notion there's 6 degrees of separation or what have you, but the idea is, if I wanted to get a package to someone in, you pick a country in the world, you give me a country, you need to get to someone in Tanatuba or something like that, all right? To get a package to someone in Upper Volta. I don't know anyone from Upper Volta, but I know someone from this area that I know is a neighboring country. I'll send the package to him, and probably he'll know someone much closer to that. And all it takes is a few leaps for me to get from one person to another, and I can get there. And it's really true that you can quickly span a network, jump across a network very quickly if you just have a few long distance connections. And for infection spread, it makes a huge difference for contagion. What about a scale-free network? What about a scale-free network? What's the big deal about that?
Some people have very little connections, some people have a lot.
Yeah. In fact, most people have low. A small number of people have a lot, but those small number of people are super important. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, that if someone has a large number of connections, why are they particularly important in terms of contagion? Whether it's having influence on getting people to buy a product, or in terms of getting sick, or spreading on a computer virus, why is it that people with a large, or institutions or parties with a large number of connections are so important?
Because they're more likely to get infected,
They're
and
more, yes?
they have more people to infect too.
Exactly. They're simultaneously more likely to get infected and more likely to pass it on to somebody if they do get infected. They're like magnets for getting the contagion and then just hubs for disseminating it. And this makes them incredibly important. And it turns out that within scale-free networks, it has a very long tail. I don't know if you remember this, but when we experimented with it, there were some individuals, maybe most individuals that have 3 connections, 4 connections. There might be some with, 100, some with 150, because it's a heavy tail. It goes way out there, and those with large number are the tail that wags it up. They're the ones that have a disproportionate impact. And if you're going to focus on protecting someone, or changing behavior, or what have you, vaccinating someone, it's those you've got to focus on. You could focus on 80% of the population and not do nearly as good a job as, 2% to the right people. And you can make a bigger difference. Scale-free networks also happen to be a very good approximation to many network settings. Not all, but many. Scale-free networks appear in all sorts of structures, software structures of large-scale software systems, structures associated with organizations, or structures associated with internet connectivity, structures associated with social networks, etc. We see them appear in our work with smartphone collected data on contact patterns, and they approximate some of what we see, etc. So you know, they're a fairly common model of networks, a fairly commonly seen pattern within networks. And it captures the fact that there's a huge variation in the number of connections, okay? And the structure of the network strongly influences the behavior of processes on the network, the dynamics associated with it. Okay, right. So scale free, we characterize this. State space methods. I'm not going to characterize this much because we talked about it. I didn't talk today much about flow lines. What are these little arrows? What does that mean?
Indicate that if you're at this point, which way you're gonna go.
Yeah, how do you compute those arrows?
Derivative of
Yeah, exactly. They point according to the derivative. Look, I'm at this place, and that means I have a certain number of susceptibles and a certain number of effectives. I plug those into the differential equations, and I get back, you know, okay, S dot is such and such, Y dot is such and such. And based on Y dot, you know, if Y dot is high, it's going to be pointing, you know, upwards. If Y dot is negative, it's going to be pointing downwards. Oh, sorry, for I dot. And then for S dot, you know, if it's positive, it'll be pointing this way, negative pointing that way. And so between those, that's just, there's no mystery here about where it is. But it very significantly, it means if I put down the system at that point, what will happen? If I put the system, if I started the system at this state, what would happen? Okay, yeah, and it will just follow the flow lines. These just show it's like the direction of flow of a current, right? It'll just follow it out, and you know, here it would lead to, so it actually here, I think it leads to another equilibrium up here. If I follow these, it'll take me down to here. So this kind of gives a sense of the overall flow, how the system would behave from a wide variety of points in state. And that's a really powerful thing to sort of depict system behavior more generally, you know, how it could behave. And here, by the way, you can see two different sort of equilibria associated with it. I think this one, right, this one, I'd have to mumble. I had a better depiction of it, but where one went this way and one went that way. Two different basins of attraction. Okay, we didn't really talk about this much, except I did mention it. So, nominal dimensionality, intrinsic dimensionality. What are the differences between the two? Here's the system of nominal dimensionality 3. I would argue that its intrinsic dimensionality is 2. Why? It's a simple concept we talked about several times. Why does this system have only 2 degrees of freedom?
either susceptible or infected.
Okay, but you could be in this state, but okay, they do depend on each other, but you could have a system where it's an open population, for example, and susceptible and infected depend on each other, but it still has 3 degrees of freedom. So that's not the key thing. What is the key thing here? I'll tell you that, and this is another way I say its intrinsic dimensionalities too. If I could specify fully, if I know all the constants associated with the mean contacts and per infected contacts, I could specify the system with just 2 numbers. Why? Why would that be enough?
Because you can calculate the last one from the 2.
Yeah, why can you cast? Because knowing the total population, which is a fixed number here, just a number, I can calculate the third stock from the 2, because S plus I plus this third stock have to equal N, the total number. Mm-hmm. And the total size of the population. So that's why, ladies and gentlemen, there's only 2 degrees of freedom. If you plotted this out, it looks like 3 degrees. But if you look at it from the right angle, this is what you'll see. It's all on a plane. It's on a plane, ladies and gentlemen. not on a jet plane, but on a mathematical plane. And if you look to the right, there's only 2 degrees. The rest is flat. You could specifying 2 coordinates, you can determine the 3rd coordinate. Okay. Depending where you are in this and this, you can determine how far up you are. Yeah. Okay. Causal loop diagrams. Good things. Causal loop diagrams. They depict causality. You'd need to know what it means for one variable to be connected to another with a plus connection or with a minus connection. Oh, please. Oh, gosh, no, don't do those. Don't do those things. Man, I'm remembering back to last year. Don't do it. No, don't. Oh, man, it's horrible to contemplate. Just to remember the terrible causal loops that some students gave me. Oh gosh, don't do that too. So let me tell you some pathologies. Don't do it, okay? Look, sometimes you don't know what the prof wants, but at least you know what he doesn't want, right? I mean, don't give him what he doesn't want. So let me give you some pathologies. Don't give me these, okay? Okay. Please do not give me an arrow from A to B, and you say A is plus or something like that. Okay? Some students do this. They say, like, okay, that A is the plus and B is the minus. Those may look like good grades, but to a good grade when it comes to this. Don't give me a bidirectional arrow like that, okay? If A influences B and B influences A, make it 2 separate arrows. They're 2 separate causal processes. Don't put the same arrow. Don't, under any circumstance, give me something like this, or give me something like with no arrow at all, and give me something like this. Okay? There's also times where students will do this. and yeah, don't do it. Don't do it. There's other ones too. They're wild. They were wild. I actually have a very rigorous formula for like totaling up, and it's totaling up the points, and it was brutal for some. Let's see, other pathologies. Well, don't give me a variable where it has no polarity. So it does not clear what up and what more and less mean with respect to a variable like this. And there are such variables. I always have trouble coming up with them live, but there are times where you can give a variable and there's no well-defined notion of like
how extreme a variable thing is. You don't really say which extreme it is.
Yeah, or you know, it might say like male or something. Like, okay, okay, so I don't know what that means, or it might, and yeah, I'm having trouble remembering circumstance. Color. I guess you could say as well, it's faded or more color, but it's not clear like which color does it mean or what have you. So what other pathologies do I see in these diagrams? They sometimes get whacked out. I'm trying to remember the exact ways in which maybe I blotted it out. It was really So another thing is show loops. How do you recognize the feedback in the causal loop diagram?
The product of the,
Okay, that's the polarity of the feedback. All right. I asked, like, how would I know if it's a positive or negative feedback?
If it's self-regulating.
Sorry.
If it's self-regulating.
Okay, so that's true. That negative feedback would be self-regulating. That's true. But how would I know from the links involved? First of all, how would I recognize the feedback at all?
There's a loop.
If there's a loop. Sorry?
It's on.
Okay, yeah, it's just, it may not last on if
So
it's,
plug in the
oh,
Right. On your right.
on my right, there's one behind, oh, man. Okay, that's, the only problem is I'm worried that we lost the video recording. Let's just, okay, let's